Welcome to Point Blank. This is your host, Panama Crypto. Today, our guest is Scott Melker, better known in crypto as the Wolf of Wall Street. He's the host of a podcast named after his alias. He's a former DJ and producer. Welcome, Scott. My pleasure having you on Point Blank.
Hey, man. Thank you so much for asking me. It's my pleasure to be here.
Cool. So let's get going. Tell us a bit about yourself. Who is the Wolf of Wall Street?
Well, it's funny. The name, The Wolf of Wall Street, was kind of like a joke that I put up one day as my Twitter name. I'm at Scott Melker, so I'm not at The Wolf of Wall Street. It was always just my normal name. And then people just started calling me Wolf, so the name sort of stuck, and that's why it's always remained that way. But if obviously you're asking me who I am as a person, I think that I'm just a guy who's had a whole lot of different experiences. I like to joke that kind of a jack of all trades. I was a kid with a pretty significant ADHD, so I was always all over the place. I had tons of interests. I like to play every sport and do every activity. And I've always, not slept very much and just had an overactive brain and like to learn new things and be involved in a lot of different things. I went to college at a school that was very big for business and finance at the University of Pennsylvania. And I decided not to take a Wall Street job when I had the opportunity and to pursue my passion in music at the time. As the music career built, I never really had to go back to other things for almost 20 years. But the one thing that was always consistent on the side of that was trading and money and being interested in investing. Once I had children and got a bit older, the DJ thing slowed down and really didn't interest me very much. And I'm the type of person, strangely, even if it's something I love, I can cut it very quickly and move on to something else. I got very passionate about trading, and it was the same time I was starting to trade crypto. And, I went down this rabbit hole and led me to where we are today.
So you went from DJ and producer to crypto. How you ended up here?
I ended up here like most people, which is that I was already trading in other markets, and everybody started talking about Bitcoin and altcoins. And you come over here and see this crazy volatility and charts and things doing 100Xs. So, I came for the money. Like I said, it was just kind of fortuitous timing with me deciding to move away from music. I was traveling all the time. I had my daughter. She's 5 years old. And so it's funny, I had a big show at South by Southwest in Austin, Texas in March that year. And my daughter's due date was the same time. So she was born. We were waiting to see if I was going to go play this show or not. And she was born 2 days before I had to be there. So the day we took her home from the hospital, I had to leave and go play this show with Future in Austin, the rapper Future. And and it was horrible, like being away, and I just had the baby. And at that point, I basically said, man, I'll do this sometimes, but I'm not going to do it all the time, and slowly from there, I just didn't want to be away at all anymore. And that's really how it happened, because I had just sort of started learning about crypto and getting into it. Although that was, I guess that was 2015. And I decided to just trade more. And then I started learning about crypto in 2016. And like I said, I just, I took the red pill or the blue pill. I can't remember which one it is. And I really went down the rabbit hole and became, very passionate about the space. And for whatever reason, that resonated with people on Twitter and opened a lot of different avenues for, me to continue building all the things I was working on.
Do you really believe in the mass adoption of Bitcoin and crypto?
That's an interesting question. What I believe is that it doesn't need mass adoption. I believe that if you have enough passionate people, like a core audience, and in an environment like we're seeing today with quantitative easing and infinite money printing and all of these things, I think that the use case will be forced upon people to some degree, and that, we don't really need everyone on board if the global economy starts to really melt down. I definitely believe in Bitcoin very much as a hedge against the things that we're seeing now, against corrupt governments, against centralized authority. But it's interesting, we've seen this tremendous rise in stable coins in this market. And I think that to some degree, stable coins are actually much more effective for a huge part of the Bitcoin case, which is for actually transacting. Obviously, we all know Bitcoin is extremely volatile. So if I owe someone $1,000 and I send them $1,000 in Bitcoin, by the time they receive it, that could be $800 or $1,200. And that's obviously that risk is mitigated by stable coins, which usually are on a faster, send faster, they arrive faster. So, I think the Bitcoin case itself has to become more of a store of value, but the long-term use case of crypto may be more in the DeFi and stablecoin space. But yes, I would say that I'm extremely bullish on it very long-term. I think that, this is the future of money and finance, and that we're extremely early and honestly very fortunate to be here.
I have to agree. I think I'm on the same page. So where do you see it like in 10 years, like long term?
If you're asking about price, I have no idea. And I'm, you obviously, we follow each other and we interact. I'm not really one for like grandiose predictions or huge statements of where things are going, because I've been in markets long enough to know that you're just going to make yourself look like an idiot by even thinking in that manner. Like as a trader, I'm more of a level to level kind of guy, let it just get to the first place and then I'll reevaluate and see where it's going from there. As an investor, I just buy, I just buy whenever I have the extra money and it fits my mood. I buy and I'm waiting 10 years. So yeah, long term, I don't really care what the price is. I believe it will be much higher than it is now, whether that's 25,000 or 250,000. I'm not going to get caught up in that. And sort of to what I was saying before, I really do believe it's the future of money. I guess there will be threats to it, national digital currencies, digital euro, digital yuan, China, whatever. But if there's one thing we've seen, it's that Bitcoin and crypto in general are extremely resilient. Even after the recent volatility, it just always seems to come back. And I believe that will be the case into the future, no matter how much people try to stop it.
This episode is brought to you by PrimeXBT, the exchange that makes possible to trade with leverage on legacy markets from a single Bitcoin-based account. Switching gears here, what's your take on March 13 Bitmex crash? Do you think this was a normal market behavior?
I think that the answer is yes and no. So I think that the first leg of that drop was normal market behavior. And obviously you have to understand that Bitcoin's not necessarily a normal market in general. Because it's small and it's nascent, obviously the actions of a few large players disproportionately affect price and what happens. So, from the people I've spoken to, hedge fund managers, other people in the know, exchange, obviously I have my own podcast and I've had this conversation probably 5-6 times with people that run these platforms and such. And it seems the general consensus and what I would think is that, it was a risk-off environment. It's interesting because Bitcoin is very liquid in that, like, if you need to exit one of your assets, Bitcoin's very, very easy to sell. If you look at what was happening that day in global markets, the US Treasuries bonds, there was no bids on the book. You see, obviously the Fed came in and provided a floor, but there was nobody to buy a bond. You couldn't sell a bond. If you're a huge player and you're exposed to multiple markets, at that point, crypto was practically the only thing that you could sell to get liquid and get cash right at that moment. So I think that's what triggered it, was people, I'm not going to say it was margin calls or whatever it was, but I think people were trying to get to cash. And this is a 24/7 market. It's not hard to sell your Bitcoin. So I think some very large players probably sold a portion of their Bitcoin to raise cash. I think that was the first half. The 8,000-9,000 dropped to the 5s. And then I think that quick sell-off by those few parties triggered an inefficient liquidation engine on Bitmex, which caused price to continue down further. I mean, I'm a very vocal opponent of Bitmex. I think it's a casino. I think it's a borderline scam, and everybody has their own opinion on that. But if you look at the events of that day, there was a point where price was in the 3,000s and there was only 15 million bids on the book total. So one more 15 million sell order or liquidation order would have sent the price of Bitcoin on Bitmex to zero. And we know that Bitmex to some degree leads the market and obviously affects the spot market. And then they had that magic down for maintenance and pretended that they didn't shut it off to prevent that from happening. And then a 50% bounce back to almost 6,000, in a matter of hours. All of that happened actually while I was sleeping. So, which was tremendous for me because I had put these stink bids at 4,000 for Bitcoin when it was in the fives before I went to bed, thinking they would never hit. And I woke up and price was 5,800, and I immediately sold the entire position from 4,000. But so I think the front leg was normal market behavior, however you define normal in this market. And the back end was caused by Bitmex and perhaps other leverage exchanges, but it's very clear that Bitmex was the driving factor in that second part of the dip.
You think Bitmex will survive with so much better competition out there, like on scheduled maintenances, server overloads? Something has to give.
I'm surprised they've survived this long. I've had multiple people tell me, and it's hearsay, that the CFTC or that agencies in the United States have Bitmex on their radar. I don't know if they have an authority over it. So from a regulatory standpoint, I'd be very surprised if eventually some government didn't come after them. But again, I would have thought that would have happened in the past already. If you're talking about from the standpoint of retail and traders, I think we're already seeing a significant decrease in volume on the exchange and people moving to exchanges that they view as safer and perhaps more honest. So, outside of them being shut down by a regulator, I think they will survive, but I think that their time is over as the top exchange of the market.
I sure hope so. There's like too many good options out there where you can trade without the risk of your orders not getting there,
Yeah, I mean, the things that they pull, there's no excuse for having those, the times when the exchange is completely frozen every time price moves. We know that they could fix that. You have to just assume at this point that that's part of their plan, counter trade you while you can't close your position. And, they have an internal trading desk. We know all these things. So, it's the same as someone who likes to play roulette and they'll defend the casino till the end of time, even knowing that the casino has the edge, right?
Yeah, also considering they have like the deepest pocket in crypto. They're probably the exchange that has made more money since 2017, right?
That's true. And they have an insurance fund that they didn't even tap when they crashed the entire market down to the 3,000s. So what is the insurance fund for if not for situations like that, right? So that insurance fund clearly is just their plaything to go buy probably boats and jets with.
Yeah, they absolutely don't have an excuse to not invest the money they have on resources.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think they want to. I think it's the way they make money.
No doubt. Now jumping to other topics in crypto here. Are we safe using USDT considering Bitfinex is under scrutiny by New York Attorney General?
I mean, I consider that FUD. It doesn't concern me at all. We've seen this story play out over and over and over again, and they haven't had any issue. But that said, there's other stable coins now, right? You don't really need to use Tether, USDC, GUSD, BUSD. It's an endless list of options. I think that Tether is the most liquid. It's a very good tool. As I touched on earlier, you can send it very fast. It's good for trading. It's easier than going in and out of dollars. In certain jurisdictions, it's probably a preferred method tax-wise than going into fiat, because certain places, don't consider every single small transaction in and out of crypto to be taxable. In the United States, of course, everything you do is taxable. It's kind of a complete joke. But yeah, I think it's safe, but I certainly prefer the comfort of the good old US dollar over USDT if I'm going to just be sitting in it.
What exchange you use for that? Kraken?
No. So Kraken is the only one that's, I guess, technically available to Americans. But I've seen such outrageous wicks and price action on that exchange that I just never was comfortable touching it after a very brief period. I didn't trade with any leverage for about 2.5 years. Because honestly, I just never found an exchange I was comfortable with. But now I do trade on Femex, which I've really been happy with. I think that they've just been amazing. And the only reason I came to that was because, and I've had every single exchange, contact me. You know how it is when you're on Twitter. And I've met with the teams. They're all very kind. I just got the best feeling from Femex top to bottom. I'm on Telegram with the CEO and a whole group of all of them. And if I have a concern or feedback, it's immediately incorporated. So I feel like I have a say in how things go on the exchange. And so that's where I've been trading. Of course, there's always counterparty risk as an American. So I would never, have a huge amount for me of Bitcoin on any leverage exchange, just because, who knows with regulation or KYC and you never know what kind of regulation, but I feel very, very safe and comfortable there. They now have a pretty incredible spot feature as well, but I primarily invest and trade spot on Voyager in the United States.
Cool. Now to the non-crypto topics. What is your COVID take? Was it engineered?
No, I don't think it was engineered. I've spoken to quite a few infectious disease experts and epidemiologists and stuff on my podcast, actually. And I come from a family of scientists and physicians. So it's something that we've kind of discussed ad nauseum. These coronaviruses, SARS, in the past, MERS, et cetera, they know where they come from. It's not a giant leap to think that, a contaminated pangolin or bat was butchered in a market and spread. It's happened many times before. So I take that at face value. That said, obviously you can get into a million conspiracy theories and thoughts about how the reaction by governments and certain things have been to the virus. But personally, I believe that the virus is a very big deal. I've remained isolated for various reasons with my family. We have at-risk people in our family. And actually, we've been isolated for 12 weeks, but have had people in my house that have shown symptoms and have been sick. And so there's never really been a time that even everyone in my own house was healthy for 12 weeks where we would feel comfortable exposing other people. But no, I don't think it's engineered. I think that, it's a result of the way that humans live, result of certain behaviors in China, of course, the wet markets and such. And, I don't really think we need to dig for a reason that it happened.
Yeah. My wife is an MD, a psychiatrist, and she goes often to the hospital. And I think she sees me as the guy with the tinfoil hat here talking about all the nonsense conspiracy you read on the internet. And she's pretty pissed about that with me.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of people who are much smarter than me and who are actually experts in this. And I'm yet to come across a single person who's come face to face with this virus and doesn't think it's a big deal. Like you don't find many you find healthcare workers who are pundits and who are doctors, but aren't in the emergency room or all these things, who have their theories. But anyone who's been on the front lines of a place where this is surging, you've never heard someone say, it's not that bad, or it's just the flu, or it's any of these things. This is a virus that's extremely deadly. It wreaks havoc on people's bodies. It's extremely infectious. It sticks around for a long time. It's like the perfect killer, really. And, maybe it won't spread outdoors and it will indoors, or maybe, humidity will stop it. But all these things, to me, they call it a novel virus for a reason, and that's an admission that you don't understand it. So like I personally would exercise caution and remain safe and protect my family until there's definitive information that we can act on. I just feel like everything normal and pretending it isn't happening just because like every once in a while there's a report that you like that fits your own narrative or bias as an individual is very dangerous. For me, I just think it's safer to wear a mask and remain socially distanced and play it safe. I have family to worry about.
Yeah, better be safe than sorry, right?
If everyone would just do that, there would be no concern, because if everybody just stayed a few feet apart and respected each other's space, I really think it would stop the spread to some degree, to a very large degree. But instead, we do these drastic things and then we go drastically the other way, and it's impossible.
And in the U.S., with this riots and mass conglomerates protests, in 2 weeks' times, I guess this is going to explode, or should explode.
I think it'll take a lot longer than 2 weeks. The people are outside. A lot of them are wearing masks. Who knows? It's interesting because it's either going to be like prove that it was a huge hoax, which we know it's not. I mean, Italy was not a hoax. Spain was not a hoax. New York was not a hoax. What's happening in Brazil is not a hoax. China,
Spain.
Yeah, I mean, France, on and on. So it's not a hoax. The question is, is it sort of slowing on a first wave, and will there be this tremendous second wave? But yeah, it's a really interesting study in human psychology to see the way that the media reacts and the way the individuals react, because obviously, I'm left of center politically. I have no reason not to share that. I'm pretty moderate, but seemingly, obviously, I believe, first of all, these protests are extremely justified. I think there's a systematic race problem, but the people who are protesting, largely to a degree, are probably the ones who 2 weeks ago would have said stay home and don't put people at risk. And now you see the media that was saying anyone who goes out or goes to the beach or any of these things is insane, you're putting people at risk, and then on the other hand praising the mass protests that are going on and sort of forgetting about the virus. So it's this really interesting sort of bipolarity with the situation that's happening. But yeah, I mean, I think we're going to see a tremendous spike. The other thing is, it's incredible to me, at least in the United States. You can look at countries that have very effective plans in place for dealing with this virus. In the United States, it's like we had to make our own tests. We didn't take the reliable tests from other countries. And now we have, evidence that tests are giving false negatives 30% of the time, and that the antibody tests are giving false positives up to 50% of the time, which is a nightmare. You can't even have false positives over 1% and be confident as a population. So it's like we're being fed data. All the data is skewed. It's politically driven to some degree, and it's probably wrong. And that's what people are basing decisions on in an environment where their lives could potentially be at risk. It's just it's like all of the fears about misinformation and all this craziness, this sort of post-fact world that we live in, has all come to this head with this virus, where everyone thinks everything is a lie or that it's a narrative of politics. And we land in this place where even the science and the data that we get, nobody trusts, right? And so how are you supposed to make a decision? Yet again, that to me is the decision where I'm perfectly comfortable here. We're cool. We're just going to stay inside for a while and let everybody else be the guinea pigs. I have no problem with that. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more than likely we're going to see a massive second wave of this virus.
Why do you think it will be the impact on the U.S. economy?
Do you mean the stock market or the economy? Because general, they're two very different
jobs.
Yeah, I think
right now there's 40 million people unemployed in the U.S. That's a bit more than 11% of the total population.
So interesting. I don't know if you'd want to discuss, because I don't know when you'll put this out, but today the May numbers for employment came out. I'm sure you saw this morning. And shocked the world, and Trump's, on TV talking about it, that we gained 2.5 million jobs in the United States economy in May, which is interesting because every week on Thursdays, we get a report of unemployment, 3 million, 3 million, 2 million, 1.9 million, for the last 4 weeks, something like that, which is roughly 10 million jobs lost. But now they're saying that we gained 2.5 million jobs. So to believe that, or if that's true, that means 10 million people lost their jobs, but 12.5 million people were hired for other jobs, right? To give us a net gain of 2.5 million. First of all, I don't believe that. I think that the numbers are completely cooked. The way that they, unemployment's always a disaster because the way that they count it, who they count, and especially in this situation where everybody has a different way of counting people who are temporarily laid off, who might be on furlough, but might get their jobs back. If you dig into the numbers a little deeper, it seems that there was still massive net job losses, but a lot of the temporary people did go back to their jobs as the economy's opened, and they're counting those as new jobs, which may not have been counted as lost jobs before. So obviously it's very confusing. But to answer the question, listen, if the disease magically disappears, then I think there's going to be no impact. I think the economy will absolutely rip. The stock market will go to new highs, but I don't personally believe that. I think that the stock market is being absolutely manipulated, as always, by quantitative easing, the Fed, bailout, stimulus, all of these disgusting, socialist, social welfare for the wealthy policies that are just beyond insane. So yeah, the market goes up, but your average person is getting hurt. In fact, the numbers today showed that, overall unemployment dropped from like 13 to 11% or something like that, but that unemployment among African Americans rose, right? So that tells the story, right? It's the same wealth divide and income inequality there's always been in the United States. And I think that will only be amplified by this virus if it continues to come back. We know that most of the jobs lost are lost by people who make, less than $70,000 a year. It's not rich people that are losing their jobs. So I think it's going to further divide people, cause further anger, further rioting. And I think that the economy itself will continue to contract, and maybe the stock market will continue to rise. Although, I don't think that can go on forever either. I just think that that's a political tool to, make sure that the people in power remain there through the election.
So how do you trade this on legacy markets?
I don't. So there's the old saying that markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. I think that's more true now than ever before. So in March, I was shorting aggressively. I shorted every bounce, did extremely well. My last round, I was trying to short as it was rising, and I stopped out on a few and closed a few in profit. It was a wash, but I made a ton of money shorting the market on the way down. But I have not bought anything as a trader since. So I've quote unquote, a 78, 79% retracement rise from the bottom. But that said, I think you say, how do you trade this in legacy? I think it's very important for people to understand the proper way to approach things is always as an investor first and as a trader second. Like, I've been very vocal that even as a professional trader, I only trade or expose my portfolio 15% as a trader. So 70% of my portfolio is always investments. I never change my strategy. I haven't changed a single thing. I dollar cost average. I make my automatic buys. So I've been buying every single dip. So as an investor, which is the largest part of my portfolio, I've done exceptionally well since the bottom. As a trader, I've completely missed it, but I'm only trading with 15% of my money. And I'm not really at a position now, like it's, I don't believe in this Ponzi scheme. I don't want to trade it. So I just haven't been. I did short for the first time in ages yesterday, and that's underwater at the moment. I just shorted the SPY right before those employment numbers came out. So I'm 2% underwater or something, which is no big deal. But like, as a trader in the stock market, I will only short ever because I'm net long. I'm the same way about Bitcoin, right? My Bitcoin portfolio, my crypto portfolio is 70% sitting in Bitcoin, cold storage, never to be touched. I'm trading with a smaller percent. So even if I short and lose, I'm making money. And that's, for me, emotionally, the only time I want to be short a market is a trade that's a hedge against a net long position. And it's very easy to reduce risk that way, and very easy to remain unemotional because you don't feel bad at all when the market rises against you. But the real answer is, if you want to really talk about, that's how I trade this in legacy. But they released a study recently that said in March and April, which, starting crypto bottomed in March 12th or something, but the stock market bottomed around March 23rd. March and April, only 12 or 13% of all hedge funds on Wall Street were profitable. So we've seen what was now the best 50 consecutive days in the history of the stock market up on the SPX. So there's the best 50 days of trading in history where all you ever had to do was buy, and only 12 or 13% of the big money professionals have made money. So that tells you that it's rising on everybody shorting, right? This is just like one long short squeeze of all this big money. And that's not, a true recovery in my eyes. So I think it'll likely go back down. But the thing is, the reason that I say don't trade it is because if the big boys are getting slaughtered in such an obvious move up, then nobody has any idea what's happening or what's going on. And I just don't trade a market when I don't have a feel for it.
That's a really good advice. I guess the hardest part of trading and being an investor is to sit on your hands.
Yeah, no position is a position, right? People act like there's only long and short, but most of the time as a trader, I'm on the sidelines.
George Floyd's murder, will it have an impact on U.S. elections? Who will win?
I don't think anyone will even remember George Floyd's name by the election, unfortunately. I think that's really sad, but we've seen it over and over again in the United States, and it's only compounded with the velocity of the news cycle in this presidency in particular. We forget things that would have shaken the world 10 years ago. News events, these crazy things disappear in the news cycle within 24 hours. So, this is not the first time that we've witnessed a black person being murdered by a white cop on national TV. It's not the first time that we've seen mass protesting as a result, and we haven't seen change as a result in the past. I'm a very optimistic person in general, but we're talking about institutional racism, something that's systematic. It's been there from the very beginning. And the reality is there's a huge chunk of America who probably watched that video and said, good, it's crazy, it's sad, but it's a very racist country. And so, I think that they'll bury this like they've buried everything else. I mean, we saw, you're not American, but I don't know if you recall, Sandy Hook, where someone walked into a school and opened fire and killed a ton of American children, right? And everyone said, this is the moment, this is the time, we're going to get some gun reform, some sensible laws. We're not going to take everyone's guns away, but we're going to get some sensible laws. Nothing. Then mass shooting in Las Vegas, right? Guy opens fire from a hotel window, kills a ton of people. Well, this will definitely get everybody on board, right? No, nothing. The NRA, the gun lobby, way too strong to actually affect change. And to think about what it would take now, and I'm not saying it won't happen, it just take a very long time to change the way that police behave. I mean, police are trained. They're not trained to avoid these situations, I should say. I mean, you were watching these videos. It's like we're watching it in real time. Every single day, there's another video of a woman getting hit in the face with a nightstick, or another man, the old man yesterday who was pushed out of the way, was bleeding on the concrete, and all the cops just walked right past him. I mean, this is a systematic problem, and systematic problems don't happen, are not solved fast. So I don't think George Floyd himself will have any effect on this election. I think people who are going to vote one way or the other are going to vote one way or the other. The only way it would have an effect is if these protests continue and it actually gets, the minority population and more Democrats out to vote. Because the one thing we know is that Republicans are going to vote. They're going to come out. They're going to vote for Donald Trump. They'll vote if there's a global pandemic. They'll vote no matter what. And what we've seen in the past is that that's not necessarily the case, on the other side. If there's a second wave of this virus, I can't imagine. I imagine a lot of people are not going to go stand in line at a voting booth and cast their vote. So it's really interesting. I think that it's going to be a very interesting election. It could go either way, but I do not think that the murder of George Floyd, sadly, is going to have much of an impact. It should, but I just don't see it.
Sadly, as a society, we lose focus quite quickly with all the the mass media is giving us or spoon feeding us. So I guess all this that is happening on 2020 is gonna be quickly forgotten, like in a few months.
Yeah, I think so. But what we need to see is, for once, the reason that there's never been change, I think, if you're talking about these previous, abuses by the police, is that you never see these guys prosecuted, right? You never see them punished. Like, they get a slap on the wrist, they're back on the force a year later, all these things. Like, they need to put this dude in jail for life like they would any other criminal. And they need to prosecute the other 3 guys for being complicit. I'm not saying they need to go away for life, but they're accessories to this murder. And they need to treat them like they would any other criminal. And that needs to happen like the next 10 times that this happens, right? So that police officers will understand that that there's actually a punishment for this sort of treatment and murdering people in the streets. And until that happens, there's no change here. There's just, these protests are landing on deaf ears. I think we know that, right? Do you think that the administration is paying any heed to these protests? No, they're building a wall around the White House and saying, who cares? They'll go away soon. They'll eventually give up, right? And they always do. These protests always eventually come to an end.
Yeah, adding to the point about what you said about the cops, this guy Derek Chauvin had like a big previous history of abuse cases of citizens and even murder of a few. And it surprises me that this guy, after I don't know, like more than a decade, is still being a cop. Like, why this guy wasn't prosecuted? Why is he in jail? Like, these guys, the police has probably the best lawyers in the country. And, like, nobody can mess with them.
Yeah, and they all protect each other. But then, and what's even crazier to what you just said, this guy was clearly a bad cop. Like, there's no question. But bad cops, there's no such thing, right? Nobody kicks them off. They never get in trouble. But like the other guys, I don't know if you've heard the story, but the other cops were like being trained. Basically, they're like rookies. So this guy was the person they chose to train these other dudes. So like, think about that. There's these other cops holding him down, another guy watching, one of them who made some comment at some point during the murder and said, hey, are you sure like you should keep doing that? And he was like, yeah, I keep doing it. Like, he was literally teaching them how to murder someone. Right? Like, this is their teacher. He's their superior officer. Their job is to go out. This is the guy they chose to go teach these other officers. And he, if they had not gotten in trouble, would have just taught them that it was perfectly okay to put your knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes until they're dead. So if that doesn't show you how like systematic and insane that is, you got to be blind.
Basically a training course for shit cops.
Yeah. So you just pointed out all the issues that Chauvin had, and that's the guy that's training rookie officers on the street on how to deal with a black suspect. I don't even know what to call him. The guy wasn't really guilty of anything. So it was only 2 weeks before that there was another cold-blooded murder on camera. I mean, it just never ends in this country, man. It's so disgusting. It's so frustrating. Like, my parents marched for civil rights and marched on Washington. And, I've taught my whole life, we've just been very very aware of this problem. And, just like, my parents are in their 70s and I talked to them about it and they're like, it's just really, not much has changed. It's crazy, given it's not like the 1960s and nobody would say that. We've made progress. And anyone who says like there's been no progress, no change, that's not true. But the truth is that what's underlying these problems has never changed.
It's really interesting what you're saying. Like, I was reading a few months back the JFK biography, and back then the mob, the CIA, the big banks were all involved in in John's death, and you see there's not much difference what is back then to what is now. Like, there's plenty of bad influence throughout the government that can change what happens in society and in politics and even in the economy of the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my point. You know, when you ask, like, is this going to affect the election? What's going to change? I mean, these things are, you know, there's systems in place that assure that not much changes, and there's people in place who want to remain in power. You know, and until that is somehow changed, which means a total overhaul of the American government, the system, you know, campaign finance, congressional term limits, all these huge problems that would need to be tackled before, you know, we changed sort of the way that politicians operate and the way that the government operates. I just don't see much hope for change in the future. I mean, I guess, you know, that's what we have elections for, and maybe I'll be proven wrong. But, you know, I was an Obama fan. I thought that was a constructive 8 years, and it's funny because it's not surprising that Trump is what you get when you have backlash and racism in a country to having had a black president before. That's my opinion, really. You know, I think that Obama was a very good man. You can tell when the guy speaks that, you know, it's from his heart. I think he's a genuine person. He made his mistakes. You don't have to agree with his politics, but nobody's going to ever agree with all of the politics of their own side or the other side, which is like a fallacy of the two-party system, right? I have some conservative views. I have some liberal views, and I have a lot that fall in the middle and don't really fall in either place. But like, I believe that leaders should have humanity, you know, and they should really want change. Whether their change and their ideas are misguided, in my opinion, is irrelevant. But you want to know that they actually, whatever they believe in, is at the benefit of the people that they represent. And I think that, you know, him being president really empowered a lot of racism and brought a lot of things that were under the surface to the surface. And, you know, this populist and racist regime that we sort of are under now is the sad result of that brief moment of prosperity and hope.
Amen to that. Knowing what we know about COVID and Floyd's, how you foresee these events will settle down in the U.S.? What impact will it have in the economy, policy, regular Jane and Joe?
Man, I mean, it remains, as we talked about before, like, it remains to be seen with COVID, right? I mean, I believe that listen, like, I don't believe, or I don't have an opinion on science. From the people I've spoken to who understand the science, a second wave is very likely. So I think if there's a second wave, that it's going to hurt the economy and that it will not settle down, so to speak. And further, I think the way that we've reacted to the first wave, you know, Trump's already said things like, hey, we're not closing down if there's a second wave. If there's a worse second wave of virus, and most people view that the first wave wasn't a big deal, they're going to react based on what saw the first time and not the reality of the second time. So I have a lot of fears that people are going to go about their business if the virus comes back still believing it's a hoax and it's stupid and it'll be really, really, really bad, at which point the economy will completely collapse, right? Because you need supply and demand, and you'll have neither again. I touched on the Floyd thing before. I think that'll naturally settle itself down. I hope it doesn't, but you know, I can only go by evidence of the past, and we have, you know, hundreds of years of very little change when people see events like we saw with him. As far as the impact on policy on regular people, I think that as always in this country, the regular people are the ones who are getting completely shit on. You know, I think it's a different country if you're in the bottom 90% than it is if you're in the top 10. Even a different country if you're in the top 1%, and even a different country than that if you're in the top 1% of the top 1%. You know, we have real income inequality, a real divide. It's, again, systematic. It's built in. It's on purpose. Everything that the government does is to help the wealthiest and hurt the poorest. And I don't care what anyone says, that's the case. It's very obvious. So I think that the people will continue to suffer. I think it's just sad.
It's a reality.
Yeah. I mean, how does this get better for your average person who is out of their job right now or has a very low paying job, and they get $1,200 once as a hush payment is how I like to view it, or either that or just an attempt to buy a vote, and at the end of the day, it's going to just continue to be the same for your average Joe. They'll drink the Kool-Aid of whatever party they'll in. They'll live their life angry and blaming the other side for their problems, and they'll never really get a fair shake unless we see really, really, really major institutional change in this country.
Yeah. Police policy change.
Yeah. In the case of George Floyd, and certainly if you're Black in America or a minority, I would say that that's at the very forefront of issues. But, the bigger issues that keep obviously poor people down, Black and otherwise, are, debt slavery, never increasing wages. I mean, there's a million things that make life very unfair for a poor person in the United States. And mostly
lack of education, lack of jobs.
I was just going to say, and then you compound that with the fact that we're in a world where everything you read is fake. It's funny because you would think having all the information in the world at your fingertips would make everyone smarter. But the reality, is it makes a few people smarter who know how to dig, and everyone else makes them to some degree a sheep, just believing what's being fed to them, fake news, false information, whatever that is. And it's so easy for a political narrative to be drilled into people's heads. It's so easy to sow division between the two sides. And, that's sadly, the more both sides are polarized, the better it plays for the politicians. So there's a lot more than just police policy that needs to change, unfortunately.
Yeah, I guess the technology is at the hands of the masses. The masses become more complacent and more lazy, and they just believe everything they're fed through the mass media.
That's right. Between mass media or social media, and social media, we all know that social media is engineered in a manner that creates an echo chamber on whatever platform you're on, right? Especially like Facebook. You don't really see the other side. All you see is, why you're right. Everyone's telling you that you're right all the time. And so everybody believes that their opinion is a fact and that their opinion matters more than the science or any of these things, right? So it's just this endless cycle of just, dumbing down the population and making them blind to the abuses that they're suffering. Most of these people are espousing or endorsing policies that are bad for them as individuals. So the Obamacare was the best example. I think Obamacare was a flawed, to even call it Obamacare is politicized. But, I think that the Healthcare Act was flawed. It was political, but it was very funny to see how aggressively the people who needed it and would benefit from it were against it just because it had Obama's name on it. Poor Republicans who needed the health care, who were, suffering from diabetes and obesity and heart disease and lung disease, who were literally being saved by it. There were all these cases you would see people saying, yeah, I don't have, I have the Affordable Care Act. I don't have Obamacare, not realizing that they were the same thing, saying I hate Obamacare, but I love my health insurance when they had Obamacare, right? It's just a perfect example of people not even understanding. They see this buzzword and literally they were being given health insurance that they needed. And because, they were being told on the news that was bad, they didn't even understand that they were voting against something that was in their own self-interest. It happens on both sides. You never lose hope. Like I said, I'm an eternal optimist. It's bad and change takes a really long time, but it always changes, right? I mean, women couldn't vote slavery, we had all these things, like we had segregation. All those things eventually do end. There was no gay marriage, and now we have gay marriage in most places. All these things, social reform takes a long time, but it's on a spectrum, and it always evolves. It always happens. There are these road bumps like now where we see populism spreading around the world. The Nazi, plenty of examples of where it's gone the other way. But if you put it on a long continuum, much like if you put any, financial chart on a long enough time frame of a market, it always kind of goes up. I think it's the same thing with social change. So it doesn't mean it'll happen in time for this election, but it always happens. It always goes the right way over time. So I am optimistic. I just, I hope it happens in time for my kids not to have to grow up in this shitty situation.
Fully with you, man. Fully with you. Many thanks, Scott, for your time. I'm really honored to have you in Point Blank.
Man, I really appreciate it. It was a great talk, went a lot of directions I didn't necessarily expect, but it's an interesting time to have these conversations now. So I really appreciate you inviting me and having me do it, and I really love what you're doing. I hope you bring a lot more people on to have these very productive conversations.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Where can people find you?
Yeah, I'm at Scott Melker, SCOTTMELKER on Twitter, or the Wolf of Wall Streets. You can definitely always follow my podcast, the Wolf of Wall Streets podcast. And if you're interested in hearing more of what I share on Twitter, I basically do it in long form in a newsletter called the Wolf Den newsletter. And you can find all the information and all of that on my Twitter account.
Amazing. Thanks for listening. Until next time. Peace. This episode was brought to you by Bitmex, the exchange where you can trade without KYC on legacy markets with your Bitcoin. You can trade commodities like gold, silver, oil, even indexes and forex. Join now and get a 50% bonus on top of your deposit for trading at u.primexbt.com/Panama.